Good evening. Welcome to the Good Night Air. I'm Cutter. Tonight we're going to do another reaction video to this National Galleries series from Scotland. This is basically just a brief introduction to Expressionism as an art movement. It's only like the last time I don't remember which movement I used this channel for before. Maybe symbolism. The symbolists, but yeah, it's only like 4 minutes long. I know a little bit about this movement, but nothing close to some of the others that I'll be covering on this channel. So it'll be kind of a good refresher for me, and hopefully if you haven't heard of this yourself, you'll walk away with some additional knowledge about art that maybe you didn't have previously. All I know is I think Expressionism, compared to Impressionism, was I think a much darker movement. It focused more on the psyche of the artists, which a lot of modern art basically is. I think I made that comment before in other videos, and I'll probably continue to do so, where modern art seems to be very much just an expression of the internal feelings of the individual, as opposed to a reflection of a grander metaphysical interpretation of the world, or chivalry, or mythology, or narrative that kind of binds a culture together, like it used to be before, really. I mean, before Romanticism, or maybe even leading into Romanticism to some degree. But anyway, that being said, I think unlike Impressionism, which largely sought to try to imitate the light of the world around the artists, in terms of their subjective perspective of the light, something along those lines. From what I recall, Expressionism dealt more with the almost like the ennui, the is that the right way to say it? The angst, the depression, the depravity, or just generally the experience of living in modern city sprawls in the turn of the 20th century. So I have here recorded that it really originated like 1905, around then, and it went till around 1925. Although, I think it kind of merged then into other movements, into like abstract expressionism and other kinds of movements after that. But I think it is just an attempt to express some of the feelings that people had living in these sometimes nightmarish cities. So, I mean, imagine, turn of the 20th century in a Chicago, or especially in Europe is where I think it was located mostly. So, I mean, in London or Paris, which were very dirty, very smoke-filled, very industrialized in a lot of ways. So, and kind of people crammed into kind of tenement housing. So, that's really kind of what I remember. But let's look at this video, see what we can learn, and hopefully we'll glean something from this movement as to how we find ourselves experiencing the current moment 100 years after this movement really hit its kind of peak in culture. Right, let's see it.
Expressionism became commonly used in Germany around 1910 to describe avant-garde art of the time. Expressionist art grew out of the work of symbolist artists such as Paul Gauguin, Edvard Munch and Vincent van Gogh. Feelings were emphasised above all else. Expression over impression. Expressionism over impressionism. Artists associated with Expressionism emerged in centres across Germany and Austria. In Dresden, a group of artists called themselves Die Brücke, or the Bridge, seeing their art as the bridge into the future as they freed themselves of the constraints of tradition.
So I think I remember hearing, it might have been a different video or maybe a book I read, that notion of the bridge came from maybe even like Friedrich Nietzsche, who argued something about like humans aren't the end point, they're kind of a bridge to something different. Like, we're always in transition, we're always in flux, we're always incomplete in a way. We're kind of potential, right? Because that's kind of, interestingly enough, that's what a bridge seems to represent. You don't stop on the bridge permanently. You go from one place to the another place, usually crossing over something that you cannot navigate without the bridge. You use the bridge to go over, a dangerous river or a canyon or something like that. And it kind of, it's full of open endings, because it's a thoroughfare. It's not, a cul-de-sac, so to speak. It's not an ending place. So I think that's part of the reason why they're called a bridge. From what I remember, you could double check yourself. But anyway, let's keep going.
Ludwig Kirchner was a key member of the bridge. This early painting by him is highly decorative as well as expressive. The bold use of colour and exaggerated form express the exotic qualities of the subject. A Japanese theatre group performing in Dresden. Something new and exotic, escaping from tradition. Emil Nolde, a member of the bridge for a short while, was a frequent visitor to the Ethnographic Museum in Berlin. This painting looks forward to his trip in 1914 to the South Pacific. The heavy brushstrokes, shadowy figure, and use of deep red gives the viewer a sense of foreboding. Like Kirchner, Nold was interested in trying to escape traditional artistic forms and in drawing inspiration from non-Western culture.
So, I mean, it's very similar to many of the other movements. It's not diving as deep into the psychological aspect of it. I mean, we're going to look at other videos and one of the other playlists I'll upload on this channel about the impact of psychology and Freud in particular, or Carl Jung. These are some kind of huge father figures of the modern psychological movements and studies. I don't know how official you want to call it that, but they're kind of father figures of psychology, and they became very popular in this day and age, basically, or leading up into it. And so, looking at the trauma, especially, I mean, think about 1910, is when this is really starting to boom and getting people's attention. I mean, that's right before World War One, right? And then that's a huge traumatic experience, and then it continues through that into the 20s, and leading into the Depression. And so it's a very it's an era rife with psychological trauma, distress, anxiety, loneliness, sadness, sorrow, all of these different things, loss, mourning, etc. So it makes sense that they kind of had a twisted darkness to it to some degree. Some of the paintings I've seen from some of these expressionists are pretty grim, very overtly sexual, very overtly how do I say this, materialistic. What I mean by that is they kind of seem to portray just maybe not materialistic. It's definitely has some kind of ideology behind it, because it almost seems like an inversion of a pre-modern view of mankind as being something that can be improved upon, or maybe not improved upon, but saved, redeemed through human action, through empathy, through love, through, at the time, Christ, right, and during Christendom, before modernity came through and really wiped out a lot of that religious belief. They seemed very much in this inversion of looking at humanity almost as being inherently twisted and inherently dark and inherently vile and kind of violent. And so often their bodies are contorted, naked, but like misshapen, and it seems like the experiences a lot of these artists had, whether it, in trauma in their childhood or in trauma during the trenches in the World War One or whatnot, it very much reflected that. They reflected that in their art, it seems, at least from what I've witnessed myself in a handful of these artists. But I was going to make the point that it seems like many other art movements in the modern era, as I keep repeating, it's attempting for feelings, right? It's all about feelings, not about objectivity, but about subjectivity. It's about the kind of atomized individual. It's almost to the point of glorifying it too. It's not. It doesn't sometimes feel as though it's like a warning. It's not a cautionary tale. It's almost like they're sinking into depravity and into pure emotion for the joy, the feeling of liberation that comes from that. Something along those lines. It's like if you watch a horror movie and there is a, maybe it's not too fine of a line, but there is kind of a line between okay, kind of scary thriller, some amount of violence that goes along with that, or threat of violence, and then it gets into kind of too much gore or blood or whatnot. And for a lot of people, including myself, that gets to be a point of, okay, you're just kind of leaning too far into that, and it feels sensationalized and kind of almost fetishized in a way. So I feel like that's, for me at least, looking at this movement, it feels kind of like that. The idea of feelings taking priority in an era of immense emotional suffering. So, take that for what it's worth. But let's keep going.
Another expressionist group developed in Munich at the same time as the bridge. This group, called Der Blaue Reiter, or the Blue Rider, took its name from a painting by Vasily Kandinsky. The art of the group emphasised the spiritual over the earthbound. After the First World War, a new wave of artists came to prominence, rejecting the outpouring of emotions of expressionist art and turned to a matter-of-fact depiction of the world. The new movement was known as New Objectivity. George Gross, who was associated with New Objectivity, claimed it revealed to the oppressed the true faces of their oppressors: ugly, corrupt. In time...
It's just like absurd. New objectivity. And then it's like, immediately here's an ideology. Right? Like, the oppressors versus the oppressed. In what... The real world is more complex than that. I think most everybody recognizes that. That's such a simplistic way of viewing it. And it's clearly Marxist, right? I'll do other videos at some point, looking at philosophy that deal with Marx. But, like, oppressor versus oppressed. You're either you're some kind of evil bourgeois kind of like pig, or you are the trampled, unheard kind of potential potential-ridden laborer who is just seeking a better world, and it's such a childlike, dichotomy between good and evil. So don't, to me, it's like, don't give me that new objectivity. Like, look at the painting or the picture, right? Like, that's not objective. That's not realism. That is clearly just, the title seems like a masking for what they actually feel underneath. Anyway, so let's just keep going.
Though, expressionists and realists who did confront the brutality of the modern industrialised world would find themselves victims of it. Weimar Germany embraced avant-garde cinema, art, architecture and theatre, but this came to an abrupt end in 1933, when Hitler's Nazi party came to power. The Nazis labelled modern art degenerate art. Expressionists and other avant-garde art, like New Objectivity, was censored for not upholding what they saw as German values. Once classified as degenerate, many artists went into exile abroad. Kirchner killed himself. Expressionists continued, though, in a fragmented way, to create emotive work. Their influence survived in later art movements like abstract expressionism and neo-expressionism. After the Second World War, Expressionism was rediscovered and reclaimed in Germany as part of its true heritage. In the 1970s and 1980s in Germany, several artists looked back at the Expressionist forerunners and were themselves dubbed neo-expressionists. Georg Baselitz was one such artist.
Okay. I'm laughing not just because it's, it just feels, okay, this is my bias, so take it for what it's worth, but it feels cringy. It feels like it's trying too hard. Also, the assumption that this is something that, I think it'll go along with the whole point of this channel, to create some kind of thesis of what is modernity, how to get out of modernity, all these kinds of things. But the major overlying thesis includes part of the aspect of feigned protest, or this sense of performative opposition, or performative revolution, or performative resistance that seems to be commonplace among many artists. That like this narrator is kind of saying that they escaped from Germany. They escaped from Germany during the Nazi uprising and whatnot, and they were they're portrayed as kind of being rebels, but they're clearly their cultural impact was picked up by the victors of the war. The Germans didn't win. I mean, honestly, I don't know if they ever could have won. Same with Japan. I mean, they were fighting the world. The world being the Anglosphere, with the United States industrialized English-speaking world, plus their small coalition of other countries around them, and the Soviet Union and China. Right? It's not like these are, and India. It's not like these are small countries. So I mean, the fact that this movement of artists then fled into the rising powers, who eventually basically conquered the planet, and then those powers basically took their art and was like, oh, this is great, you want to join our universities, and then your inspiration, you will inspire future artists who have great galleries and millions of dollars of art sold, etc. That doesn't seem like a very revolutionary kind of artist, if that makes sense. This is going to be something I'm going to hammer upon all the time. Just this false sense of being some kind of a rebel. I don't know where I'm going to go with that necessarily, but just it feels commodified now. Where it's just like, oh, here's another artist inspired by these rebels selling their art for $200 million or whatever. Okay, yeah, rebel. Sure. Anyway, let's finish this thing up. See what else they have to say.
Censorship and persecution couldn't stop the influence of these avant-garde artists. But if art is born from the human spirit, should we really be surprised?
All right. Well, so I guess my final conclusion is, the question to me is, and this is a time, an age-old question, is what is the point of art? Is art for these people, the expressionists, specifically here, and artists in general, I guess, but is art of this variety supposed to simply be, a kind of therapeutic release of emotion? Is there any end goal or end result? Because, she mentioned they were booted out of Germany for not something like, didn't reflect a German tradition or something like that. Now, of course, in those days, obviously, anything that wasn't German was going to get the boot. And so, it's very nationalistic, obviously. So that's a very narrow, view of the world. But, obviously. But to me, that begs the question then, okay, well, to what end is this art? If having a local perspective, saying this is French, or just to kind of get rid of some of the baggage that comes from the mid-century German type of thing, right? This is French, or this is New Zealand, or this is Brazilian, or this is Congolese, or this is Thai, right? Like, this art is specifically reflection of this local people. If it's not that, right? If it's not rooted in Celtic values or whatever, to what end is this movement? And I'm not going to really try to answer that in this moment, because already almost at 20 minutes. So, I'll leave that for another video. But to me, it's part of the reason why there's so many modern movements. I have this giant list of movements I'm going through, and I think part of the reason there's so many is because they blossomed forward, and then they burnt themselves out in the matter of like a few years, or 10 years, or 20 years, or whatnot. And there's no end. It's kind of like, yeah, I just express myself. Okay, well, why? Who are you? What is yourself? were there answers? Maybe that's the whole point of this channel, is to ask that question and to try to find if there were any answers provided. Anyway, on that note, I'll conclude this. It's already 20 minutes, so hopefully this was interesting to you. Hopefully my dialogue is, at least, even if you don't agree with it, hopefully it makes you think a little bit. On that note, have a great night, and God bless.